Imagine one day, in the middle of the turquoise Caribbean Sea, giant American aircraft carriers appear. In the distance is mainland Venezuela, a South American country famous for its oil and beauty queens. On one side is the planet's strongest military power, on the other is a country struggling with crisis, but with very high self-esteem. No one wants war, but if the worst-case scenario happens, if an attack occurs, what would happen? How many times stronger is the US than Venezuela? Welcome to Commentator Haikon's story. In terms of strength, the US military currently ranks #1 in the world, which is indisputable. The 2025 Military Strength Index, if a measurement unit is needed for evaluation. According to Global Firepower, a very reputable site for military strength assessment, then the US holds the #1 position on the planet. No country can compare to the US, because the US defense budget alone makes the next 10 countries look up and dream. As for Venezuela, its military strength ranks 50th, meaning it's dozens of times weaker than the US. Just considering total forces, but if looking deeper into each, the disparity becomes truly terrifying when placed on the scale. Calculated, the US has about 1.3 million soldiers in various active forces, while Venezuela only has about over 100,000 people, meaning more than 10 times fewer. The US possesses nearly 13,000 combat aircraft of various types like F-22, F-35, E-2, along with many other aircraft and modern helicopters. What about Venezuela? They only own about 200 to 230 aircraft, mostly old Russian models like Su-30 and K-2. Roughly calculating just the Air Force, the US is already about 50 to 60 times stronger. As for the defense budget, there's no need to discuss. Each year, the US spends about $900 billion on defense, a figure more than 200 times Venezuela's entire defense budget, only about $4 billion. With the amount the US spends in 2 days, Venezuela could use it for a whole year. That's not even mentioning technology. Talking about aircraft carriers is the easiest example. US aircraft carriers are like floating cities that can carry hundreds of aircraft. Venezuela doesn't have any. The US has hundreds of warships, nuclear submarines, while Venezuela mainly has a few dozen coastal patrol boats. In short, if the two countries conflict, Venezuela has no chance to resist the US. So specifically, how does it look on the map? T shoulder to shoulder, the distance ISN. From Miami, meaning the US state of Florida, flying super fast takes just over 4 hours. However, the US also has closer bases, like in the Caribbean at Puerto Rico, less than 1,000 kilometers from the Venezuelan coast, meaning if the US wants to deploy an operation, they just need to fly across the Caribbean Sea without much complexity. T think that means it. Venezuela isn't a flat country where you can just enter and attack as you please. This country has extremely complex terrain, like 3 worlds stacked on top of each other. There are mountains, forests, and sea. Each place could become a huge natural battlefield. Although in modern warfare, terrain advantage isn't always an absolute advantage, but it's still an advantage for Venezuela nonetheless. Western Venezuela is the Andes mountain range. The Andes is the highest and most rugged mountain range in South America, running along Venezuela's border with Colombia. Many mountains here are over 5,000 meters high, peaks covered in clouds year-round, with winding roads like snakes crawling. If wanting to attack from the west, the US would have to cross this area, and that's a nightmare for infantry or mechanized units. Just a few days of heavy rain, the entire route could turn into a muddy swamp, trucks sinking. Moreover, this area is home to many indigenous people familiar with the mountains, who can move quickly, know how to hide, and understand the terrain like the back of it. In war, they could become support links for guerrilla forces. The familiar fighting style of the weak against the strong. Fighting in the forest obviously doesn't require many tanks, just knowledge of the terrain and pace. As for southern Venezuela, that's the kingdom of the jungle people. We're talking about the Amazon, one of the most dense and humid ecological regions on the planet. Here, daytime temperatures can exceed 30 degrees Celsius, with humidity around 90% almost year-round. Trees intertwine like a maze, with some forests where sunlight can't even penetrate. Then in the middle of the country, there's the plains region. This area is called Orinoco, where South America's second largest river winds for thousands of kilometers, forming vast flooded areas. The rainy season turns the entire region into an inland sea. Here there are no supply routes, only water and mud. Any army not well prepared can have their vehicles stuck after just a few hours of movement. That's another different place, where about 80% of Venezuela All major cities, seaports, airports, oil refineries, and energy centers are located along the Caribbean coast. Caracas, their capital, is only about 15 kilometers from the sea. If the US were to attack, they would certainly target this area, as this is the heart of Venezuela, where power and economy are concentrated. And it's precisely here that Venezuela has defense units that can gradually retreat into the forest. Establish bases in the mountains, hide easily among trees, and then withdraw before the US can react. Continuing like this would force the opponent to deplete day by day, and sometimes month by month. It's somewhat symbolic. Venezuela is a country that can be conquered on the map, but cannot truly be controlled in reality for the simple reason that the terrain here is the enemy of every attacking army. There's a famous saying in South American military circles: in this land, the winner is the one who can endure heat, mosquitoes, and loneliness. Which is precisely what American soldiers are typically not accustomed to. They're used to air conditioning, canned food, and modern logistics, making it very difficult. Therefore, if there were a real attack, the US could capture Caracas, capture the ports, capture the functioning state, but they would never capture the mountains, rivers, and forests. There, Venezuela would still have land, and the war would never end as quickly as people imagine. But these are still hypothetical scenarios. Now let's imagine together, if the US decided to launch a military campaign against Venezuela. What would the scenario look? Please don't say this is just fiction and no one wants war to happen. First, the US would deploy carrier battle groups into the Caribbean Sea, hundreds of kilometers off the coast of Venezuela. From the air, many F-35B-2 aircraft would fly in, launching cruise missiles and smart bombs at command centers and Venezuela's air defense systems. Probably within just a few hours. Most radars, bases, air defense systems, and all other Venezuelan assets would be destroyed. With overwhelming technological superiority, the US easily controls the skies. While Venezuela only has a few hundred outdated aircraft and air defense systems that can almost only resist in theory, the war doesn't only happen in the initial stage and doesn't stop there. If the US continues to deploy troops, even if initially, once American soldiers set foot on Venezuela, they will face dense jungle terrain, hot and humid climate, mosquitoes, leeches, and along with local guerrilla fighters. This tactic seems outdated, but in reality, it remains effective. Venezuela has trained hundreds of thousands of ordinary citizens, even housewives taking up arms to defend the country. History shows that the US is very wary of guerrilla warfare. They have been bogged down in many places. Very familiar, right? Like Iraq and Afghanistan. The war in Venezuela, even if initially one, could become a prolonged quagmire lasting many years. If that happens, not only will both the entire Latin American region will be an attack from the US could trigger a chain reaction. Economically, Venezuela would fall into severe crisis. The oil fields, the country's only livelihood, could be destroyed. People would flee to Colombia or Brazil, causing a new refugee crisis. As for the US, though hundreds of times, would still have to spend hundreds of billions of face political casualties and domestic public reaction. To put it simply, if a military operation, the US might win, but it would be very difficult to maintain that victory long term. A similar story happened in Iraq or Afghanistan. If that scenario repeats in Venezuela, the consequences couldn't be worse. Looking at reality, the US has threatened many times, but ultimately stopped. The reason is very simple. They stopped because the benefits aren't great enough. First, Venezuela, despite having large oil, currently struggles to exploit them due to. Secondly, the American people do not want another war after their experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. And thirdly, politically, an attack would subject and lose credibility in the South American region. Additionally, the dense forest terrain poses difficulties, high morale among them, all leading the US to only stop at exerting pressure or imposing economic or diplomatic isolation, but never actually launching an attack. If it could be summarized in one sentence, it would be: the US is stronger than Venezuela by many times, even hundreds of times, but war is never the only solution. And it's best that this world should not have war. In military terms, being stronger doesn't mean quick victory, and being weaker doesn't mean certain defeat. Terrain, popular support, morale, resilience, these factors can change the outcome of any war. Venezuela may lose strategically, but win in terms of prolonging, holding, and exhausting the opponent. The US may win on the map, but could lose on the when public opinion and the international community. Therefore, the story, if the US attacks it, is not just an issue between two countries, but a lesson about popular support, about the cost of war, because whether winning or losing, the ones who suffer are always the people on both sides. Thank you for following this story. If you found it interesting, you can press the subscribe, turn on the notification bell and share the video. But now, please don't say goodbye. Let's explore new things. Don't hesitate to leave your feedback. And please comment below.